On the morning of December 31st, 2000, Haruko picked up the phone and called her daughter, Yasuko, who lived next door, but the call went unanswered, so she walked outside and knocked on their front door. She buzzed the intercom repeatedly but got no answer. At this point she became extremely worried. Her daughter usually had a full house with her husband and 2 children, so where were they? The Miyazawa family lived in a 3-story house in Setagaya, a ward of Tokyo, Japan. The garage and family computer were on the 1st floor, living room, kitchen and bathroom were on the 2nd floor, and a loft area with a bed on the 3rd floor. Yasuko's mother, sister, brother-in-law and nephew lived next door in their own house, but the houses were close together and poorly built, meaning sound often travelled. When nobody came to the door, Haruko used her own key to enter the Miyazawa home. No one should have to see what Haruko saw that morning. It was a shocking, bloody scene. She found her daughter's husband, 44-year-old Mikio Miyazawa, dead at the foot of the stairs. Shocked, Haruko went up the stairs to find her daughter, 41-year-old Yasuko, and her grandchild, 8-year-old Nina, brutally stabbed dozens of times. Haruko then found 6-year-old Rei dead in his bed. He had been strangled. The police concluded that the family had been murdered the night before at around 11:30 p.m. by an intruder. But how did he get in the house? It's possible he climbed a tree to reach the open bathroom window on the 2nd floor. He would have removed the window screen and entered, but there was no concrete evidence that the killer entered through the window. It was small and no fibres, fingerprints or DNA was found there. He may have entered via the balcony next to Rei's room. It makes sense since Rei was killed first. The killer certainly didn't enter through the front door because Mikio was right there on the computer and would have seen him right away. This case is still unsolved and there is evidence of bizarre behaviour from the killer. So what exactly do we know about the night of the murders? And what are the current theories as to why this family was brutally stabbed to death in their own home? Please like this video and subscribe to the channel, and credit is to the Faceless podcast for their research mentioned in this video. On the night of the murders, Yasuko had called next door to speak to her mother and arranged for Nina to go over to watch a TV program with her until about 9:30 p.m. At 10 p.m, a witness who was walking a path in the park directly behind the house said they heard a couple having an argument. Mikio worked for a marketing firm specialising in corporate branding. He worked a lot, but didn't do anything that was particularly confidential. His tasks were often routine, and at 10:38 p.m, Mikio sat at the family computer and opened a password-protected work email. At about 11:20 p.m, Haruko, Yasuko's mother who lived next door, heard a loud thud and clanking, but police think this was the loft ladder being retracted due to the proximity of the ladder and Haruko's bedroom. Police were therefore able to conclude that the murders started after 11:30 p.m. What's weird though is that no one living next door reported hearing any screams that night. It was determined that the killer snuck into Rei's bedroom first. He was on the 2nd floor in his bed by himself, likely sleeping, when the killer put his arms around his throat and strangled him. The killer then attacked Mikio. He was stabbed multiple times with a sashimi knife and finally stabbed in the head. Part of the knife was found broken off in his skull. Mikio probably tried to escape because he was found at the bottom of the stairs on the 1st floor. The killer then set upon his next victims. Yasuko and Nina were in the 3rd floor loft area asleep when they were attacked. Police think the killer stopped the attack and went downstairs to the kitchen to get a different knife. Yasuko and Nina came down to the 2nd floor, possibly thinking the killer had left, but came face to face with him when he attacked them once again. They were both found at the bottom of the stairs leading to the loft area. It's noted that they were stabbed far more brutally than Mikio, and multiple times after death. For whatever reason, this brazen killer decided to stick around. He took the phrase "make yourself at home" quite literally. He went to the family's fridge and helped himself to bottles of tea, scooped out melon with his hands, and devoured 4 ice creams from the freezer. If that wasn't enough, he used the bathroom and didn't flush. He rummaged through their medicine cabinet and cupboards until he found a first aid kit to treat his wounds. He also used sanitary pads. He also looked through the family's belongings, opening drawers and discarding papers all over the floor. A number of items were left in the bathtub which he had filled with water. Was he looking for something in particular, or was he just curious? Police did say they found evidence that he took a nap on the couch, so he clearly wasn't concerned about getting caught. Between 1:18 and 1:23 a.m, the killer accessed the family computer. All we know for sure is that he logged in, opened a new folder, and possibly opened the favorites bar. It's been reported that the computer was accessed again hours later at 10 a.m, but this was actually Haruko accidentally touching the computer when she discovered the bodies. Normally, a killer will leave the scene immediately, so why did this killer stick around for so long? The police found a knife in the kitchen along with a black glove that had a slice through the palm. The palm was covered in blood, a different type of blood to anyone else in the family, so it had to have been the killer's. After police encouraged witnesses to come forward, a taxi driver who was working the night of the murder came forward. He said he picked up 3 middle-aged men near the Miyazawa house around midnight. The men sat in silence, and one of them had some kind of injury because he left bloodstains in the car. The driver dropped them off at a nearby train station. Could it be possible that 3 men were involved in the murder when only one left traces of himself? Even if it was possible, because 2 kept watch or stood outside, why didn't they have their own getaway vehicle? The next day it was reported that a man supposedly in his 30s was seen by staff at Tobu Nikko Station about 100 miles north of Tokyo. He had a hand injury deep enough to show bone. None of the nearby hospitals had admitted anyone with that kind of injury, so police weren't able to get a name. But police think it's unlikely that this injured man was the killer because of how far it was from the Miyazawa house. But what are the chances of another person with an injury so similar to one the killer had? And the fact that no hospital treated him only adds to the theory that he got injured through nefarious ways. The killer didn't only leave behind DNA and fingerprints. Surprisingly, he left behind many of his belongings. He left his knife, a white sweatshirt with long purple sleeves, a hip bag, handkerchiefs, a padded black jacket, a grey bucket-style hat, and a plaid scarf. But the killer did not leave the house in his underwear. He took clothing that belonged to Mikio. The police determined that the clothes he left and the knife had been purchased in the Kanagawa prefecture, and some of them were new. The jacket was part of Uniqlo's newest range, and only 130 units of his long-sleeved sweatshirt were sold in Japan, and only 10 of them in Tokyo, and they went on sale just 2 months before the murders. Unfortunately, the police could not track down those who bought one. The clothes suggest the killer was young, and it seemed like clothes he already had, not an outfit purchased specifically for a killing. Regarding the knife, they couldn't track that down either, but there was some evidence that suggested the killer might not have been Japanese. Analysis of the sweatshirt indicated that it had been washed with mineral-rich hard water, which was common in South Korea, but uncommon in Japan. Particles of soil traced back to the Gyeonggi province of South Korea was also found at the crime scene. Another piece of evidence suggesting the killer was Korean was that the footprints left at the scene. It was determined that the killer's shoes were a pair of Slazenger tennis shoes size 9.5. This half size was not available anywhere in Japan, but it was available in Korea. However, the shoes could also have been mail-ordered by someone in another country, so it doesn't definitively prove that the killer was from Korea. There is also another glaring problem with the theory that the killer is Korean. In South Korea, all residents must have their fingerprints collected when they turn 17. They are added to a national database, meaning if the killer's fingerprints were checked against this database and no match was found, then that would prove he is not a Korean resident. Visitors' fingerprints are also collected upon entry to South Korea, meaning the killer could not have travelled there either. The police also ran the fingerprints in Japan but found no matches, meaning the killer did not have a criminal record in Japan. Fingerprinting of foreigners entering and leaving Japan did not come into practice until 7 or 8 years later, so if the killer left the country, he had 7 years to do so. The fingerprints are in the Interpol database. It means that if the killer commits a crime anywhere in the world, his prints can be matched with those at Interpol, but so far there has been no match. It means that the killer's fingerprints have not been found at any crime scene anywhere in the world in the 24 years since the Miyazawa murders. What kind of person, therefore, kills a whole family and never commits another crime again? One element of this case that is frustrating is the fact that the killer's DNA was everywhere in the house and yet he has not been caught. However, it's not that simple in Japan. At a crime scene in Japan, DNA does not have as much use as fingerprints because of the restrictions on it. Police are only allowed to say publicly whether DNA matches someone or not. Police are prohibited by law to use DNA to compare to online databases to find relatives. So using familial DNA, like how the Golden State Killer in the United States was caught, is not allowed in Japan. It means that without a complete match, there is nothing Japanese investigators can do. But the DNA did show that the killer was male and possibly mixed race, with his father being East Asian, most likely Korean, since one of his DNA markers was shared by 1 in 5 Koreans. But this does not mean the killer is a Korean national. He could simply have Korean ancestry, but never even visited Korea. His mother, on the other hand, was of European descent, possibly Southern European, near the Adriatic Sea, but this mitochondrial DNA, that is, DNA from the mother's side, could have been from several generations ago, so he may not have looked mixed race. This DNA profile has led some people to think that the killer is an American military person of East Asian and European descent. It's certainly possible, since around 50,000 American military personnel are stationed in Japan. A piece of evidence that supports this theory is the trace sand that was found in the killer's bag. This sand matched that of the Mojave Desert in the United States, specifically around the area of the Edwards Air Force Base in California. But how could the sand get all the way to Japan? The bag was manufactured in Osaka, so the bag must have gone from Japan to California and then back to Japan. This supports the theory that the killer was a member of the military, perhaps stationed in Japan, but he had to have been in California to pick up the sand at some point before committing the murders. But if the killer was military or the son of someone in the military, it still doesn't explain motive. The bag had only the killer's DNA on it, so it's unlikely it was bought second-hand if sand remained but no DNA from someone else did. Not only have police struggled to identify this man, but they have struggled to find a motive as well. What we know about the killer is that he's willing to kill children, which is pretty savage. It takes a particular kind of demon to kill kids. He also had the confidence to stay in the house, unfazed about getting caught. It was technically a robbery because some clothes were taken, along with about $1,000 worth of yen, but that's all. He was possibly looking for something as he scattered papers everywhere. He was sloppy, leaving DNA and fingerprints, or he just didn't care. More than 280,000 police officers have worked on this case, and it has truly stumped detectives. Nothing about it makes much sense. Why was this family murdered? The police looked into financial matters to see if there was any money problems. Did the family owe money, for example? But the Miyazawas tracked all of their spending, and there was nothing out of the ordinary. They were not rich or poor, and were a typical middle-class family. But city developers wanted the family to sell their house, since the park next to the house was going to be redeveloped. Over the years, several homeowners in the area had agreed to sell, and their homes were destroyed. At the time of the murders, there were just 6 homes still standing out of the original 60. The Miyazawas hadn't sold because they hadn't found anywhere else suitable. They were mostly concerned about their children and wanted a similar neighborhood to what they already had. Did the murders have something to do with these development plans? It doesn't make much sense because there were other families who hadn't sold, so why would they only target the Miyazawas? But the paperwork scattered all over the house and dumped in the bathtub is odd. The killer filled the tub with water, so it could have been an attempt to destroy documents. Was he looking for something in particular, or is this behavior a red herring? Investigative journalist Fumiya Ichihashi thinks that the killer is a Korean hitman hired to kill the family. He also claims he knows who hired the hitman. The motive, according to him, was to remove the family from their home so the house could be demolished for the city developers. Ichihashi said, "I've researched various crimes in detail, not only obtaining materials about the ongoing investigation, but also visiting the scenes of the crime and meeting with people involved, including survivors. I share what I dig up with the police and they reciprocate." He said that an underground real estate developer named Kaneda knew that if the Miyazawa family were to sell their house, they would receive 100 million yen for it. Kaneda wanted some of that money, so he hired a Korean to kill the family. Ichihashi even claims that he made contact with the hitman, got his fingerprints and says they are a match to the killers. But this crime screams the opposite of a contract hit. Would a hitman use a sashimi knife that broke on impact? Would a hitman leave their DNA and fingerprints? Would a hitman hang out in the house for hours afterwards? A professional hitman would be prepared, they would be quick and would leave no trace. This was an incredibly bad job if it was a hitman. It screams amateur. As we mentioned already, South Korea did cooperate with Japanese investigators and no fingerprint match was found in the Korean database, so the killer couldn't have been Korean. Another theory is that the killer could have been a local skateboarder. Mikio had to tell skateboarders in the park next to the house to keep the noise down on several occasions, so some people believe that skaters got revenge on Mikio and his family. The mess of the crime scene and behaviour of the killer does seem to point away from a professional hit, and at the time, skaters were not exactly well liked by the wider public. They caused a nuisance, skating on sidewalks, were often loud, and they hung out in groups. Skaters were seen as disrespectful deadbeats. The skate park next to the Miyazawa house was one of the few open spaces in Tokyo that was open to skaters. But the noise was quite loud, and sometimes skaters would go there after dark when they weren't supposed to. Police thought the clothes that the killer left behind were typical of what a skater might wear, and so they seriously considered this theory. Another piece of evidence that alluded to a skater being the killer was his aftershave. The killer had Drakkar Noir on his clothes, a cologne popular with skaters at the time. But the police weren't correct that the killer wore skater clothes. Several Japanese skaters from the time of the murders have commented on this case and said that the clothes were not something they would ever wear. But another piece of evidence pointing to the killer being young was a forum post on a Japanese website called 2chan. This website had no logs, so posters couldn't be traced. Posted just 3 days before the murders, the writer, who said he was just 13 years old, detailed instances of when he had previously killed animals. He referred to himself as a crow, in other words, a predator. But chillingly, he said he wanted to kill a family before the new year. The Miyazawas were killed on the night of December 30th to 31st. The police were able to confirm that this post was real and did exist. What's more is that around the same time, there were a number of cats killed in Setagaya. But we don't know if these cat killings were related to the 2chan post or the Miyazawa murders. Nevertheless, the police discounted the 2chan poster and did not take him seriously. The investigation into the murders of this close, loving family is the largest in Japanese history, and yet it has not been solved. Investigators still hope people will come forward with any information to help solve this crime. Every year, investigators congregate at the house to pay respects and make a promise that they won't give up looking for the killer. Despite pressure from developers, the family of the Miyazawas never allowed the house to be demolished.